Hello, everybody. It's Jason Grant, and tonight I have enormous pleasure of talking to Susanna Barlow, who is an absolutely amazing person. I read her blog on archetypes, and it immediately inspired a necessity for a conversation on such a topic. And with Integral, we're all about integrating all these things. So today's topic is archetype integration. And without further ado, Susanna, please tell me, who are you?
Thank you, Jason. That's a tough question. But I think I'm going to say that I'm someone that loves people, humanity, myself, which has taken me a long time to come to, human behavior. All of that fascinates me. And I've never found a topic that I haven't been interested in. And so I guess I'm a curious person. And that has led me all over the map. I'm a writer. That's something I identify with. I'm a mother, which is something that's incredibly important to me. And I love people. And so that pretty much sums up how I see myself.
Amazing stuff. Perfect answer. I love it. Tell me a little bit about how you came across the whole idea and concept of archetypes, because I read your blog post and it was like the most elaborate write-up on a particular archetype I was looking at. I can't remember which one it was, but it was like, whoa, this is wow. Tell me how you came across this.
I think the thing that led me to archetypes was dreams, nighttime dreams. I began having a series of nightmares, and they were all related to my past, and they were related to some abusive and traumatic situations that had occurred in childhood. And I couldn't get a handle on, these dreams and what they meant and why they were happening. And I wasn't sleeping. I was waking up with night sweats. And so I started studying symbols in dreams and trying to understand what my subconscious was trying to tell me. And that just was like a rabbit hole that I fell down into. And I began reading the work of Carl Jung, and that led me to other books, searching for books on the topic of archetypes. And there's actually quite a lot out there, but there's not a lot that really gets into the meat of it the way that I wanted to understand. And so I think wanting to understand my dreams helped me do some of my own research. And I started to notice that symbols and motifs that were common in dreams showed up in film and in books and in other places. And so I started doing my own process of making those connections. And I began to unravel the meaning of my dreams. And it was a very personal thing. You can find a lot of books on dream interpretation, but for myself, and I think this holds true for everyone, only you can interpret what's going on in your own subconscious. But I used archetypes and I used symbolism to help me on that journey. And that just took me way deeper into the study of archetypes. And I began doing my own writing on them about 5 years ago.
Okay, awesome. Just one technical thing. When I speak, put yourself on mute because the Google Hangouts gets this kind of weird roundabout thing, so it kind of cuts off the sound. So the next question, we take this as it comes. It's like a stream of consciousness, really, question and answer. So the next question is, we've developed this program called Fresh Mind, which is really helping people clear out some of these, what we call mental impurities, right, or shadows that people get hung up on. But really what those things seem to be, they seem to be the the archetypes that people haven't really reconciled, that they haven't really integrated. So tell me a little bit more about how you see this process of person recognizing their own, let's say, shadow archetypes, or is there even such a thing as shadow archetypes in your understanding?
Yeah, I think the shadow is really the beginning point for any kind of work with archetypes. And to just give a little bit of a background, archetypes are templates, human behavioral templates. And culture creates the archetype. So collectively, we sort of agree to certain behavioral patterns, then we participate in those patterns. And everybody that I've discovered has a different set of archetypes. Like, we respond to different archetypal patterns. Some people may find, for example, a teacher archetype is very strong in them, and others may find a hero or a warrior, for example. And so identifying what you relate strongly to, and this can be found often in who your heroes in life are, in history, in literature. Who are your favorite book characters, your favorite film characters? But the shadow side, which is the beginning point, it's the unconsciousness of that behavior. It isn't negative. It's just completely outside the circle of our awareness. And when something isn't in our awareness, it's going to act out in a shadow pattern. And so recognizing what our tendencies are first immediately moves it from shadow into our awareness. And so that process itself is a kind of integrating process.
So is it, I've come across the term psychoactivation. It's the idea of recognizing something in oneself, uh, enlightening it, throwing a bit of light on it, and then the next thing is to accept it and integrate it and understand that that's one of the internal capabilities that we have. And some of these capabilities are destructive and some of them are constructive. But as we become aware of them, they become capabilities that we can choose to have as opposed to them choosing to have us. um, so, so tell us a little bit about, like, how many, is there like a finite number of archetypes, and you know, are they good or bad? How do you see this kind of world of archetypes, and how do you work with it in your own psyche as a collective sort of construct of human self?
Wow, that's a lot. Let's see if I can remember this. Archetypes aren't good or bad any more than human beings are strictly good or bad. But like humans, we can act out in ways that are destructive and constructive. And so I like to think of archetypes as a dimension, maybe a psychological dimension. So if we want to look at human behavior, it's easier to go into a symbolic dimension to be able to examine those behavioral patterns, as opposed to identifying uniquely with that's just me or that's my personality. It's actually not entirely true. We're deeply impacted by the culture around us. And that culture is created over generations of patterns that get repeated over and over and over. And so we are not as unique as we think we are. But archetypes are a very powerful force. And there's something that I have found has been incredibly useful for two reasons. One, it helped me understand why I was motivated to do certain things, what my behavior was trying to communicate to me. And two, it helped me look at others with a much greater degree of compassion. Instead of seeing someone through a judgmental lens and thinking, what a jerk, or, why is that person so blunt? I could start to recognize the archetypal pattern behind that bluntness, for example. And when I recognized the archetype, I knew that that person was acting in an unconscious way, that their bluntness was actually an expression of who they were, not something personal. And so I began to look at people much more kindly and recognizing that they were operating from this programming, and they just weren't aware that that programming was in the shadow. And I like to think of the shadow as a distortion, that when something's in the dark, we don't always see it clearly. And we respond to it in a way that is not always accurate. And I think the same is true of archetypes. When an archetype is operating in the shadow, then we don't see it clearly and we don't see it truly. And therefore we respond to it in a way that is also inaccurate. And when we get a flashlight and we shine a light onto that object, for example, we can see clearly and then we can respond clearly. And archetypes are the same. When we see our behavior, immediately we're able to respond to that behavior in a completely different way. So I'm not sure if that answers all your questions, but I'll pause for a minute.
Actually, that's answered all. Like, I think the way you put it together, I've been trying to hold back the tears. This is like, I'm actually tearing up really, because and this is not normal for me really, but like the way you put it forward is just like tears of clarity, really, tears of blissfulness, because it's very like important, I think, for people, and I'm really showing you, I'm really tearing up. Wow. It's really important for all of us, I think, to show appreciation and respect to people like yourself, right? Who's been through like enormous amount of trouble and suffering really in your life. And right now you're speaking in the most grounded way that I've really experienced in a long time. And so that's just like, wow, I'm amazed by your tone, your clarity, your speaking without the ums and ahs. You really know what you're talking about. And so yeah, that absolutely clearly rounded off what was a set of like 3 or 4 questions. I'll try to ask the next one in a little bit more focused way. So how can people work on recognizing their shadow archetypes? Is there like a prescribed process that you could recommend?
I've found that people are either interested in archetypes and symbols, and that's a great access point to self-discovery and self-realization, or they don't. And artist types are often a personality type that is very interested in symbols. And so usually they already know what archetypes are most drawn to. They already know that. They just haven't named them. And so by looking at your life and observing what characters and character traits you most admire and you are most uncomfortable with, the ones that repulse you, that's the area you begin at. And that's already clearly defined for most people. Most people can tell you right away the character traits that they admire most and the character traits that they find most reprehensible. And if you can look at that immediately, you're looking at a mirror of yourself, because we're always most afraid of becoming the thing we despise. And yet we're also fully capable of becoming everything that we admire. So it's already in us in a potential. So for an individual to be able to begin to look at their own shadow behavior, all they have to do is look at how they judge others. What are the things that they most despise in others, or they find most irritable? Things that they would never want to be accused of, for example. Some people would be devastated to be referred to as dishonest. Somebody else might find that almost a compliment. And so being able to look at what you particularly find repulsive, upsetting, or even your pet peeves can lead you directly into your shadow behavior. And you have to get very clear and honest and be able to ask yourself, how am I doing these things? What way in my life am I behaving in this way that I'm accusing others of being and doing? And why am I afraid of being that myself? And so that's kind of the most basic beginning point.
All right, I'm going to be extremely selfish now and share something with you that I did yesterday. And I want your, I'll just consider you an expert here. You're an expert on this. But I was sitting in the train, and here in London, we have on trains, they have this constant sort of the fear of terrorism, okay? And so they have a thing of like, if you, they always have these announcements that say, if you see something suspicious, make sure you report it immediately. And then they have this catchphrase that says, see it, say it, sorted. Okay. And so I was actually drawing something where that whole statement made perfect sense. And I was drawing this idea of triangulating yourself, as in locating where you are. And so we work with this idea that there is a notion of overstanding. So this is my diagram of triangulation. I'm not sure, there it goes. So first it's overstanding, so seeing it, then understanding, which is saying it, saying what it is and explaining it, and then understanding, which is about sorting it out into your overall persona or person or psyche. So what do you think of this concept of triangulating yourself through overstanding, understanding, and understanding?
I actually think that's brilliant. I've never heard it put that way before. I love the way that you're able to use language, a familiar word like understanding and understanding and overstanding. I think that is a brilliant way to describe the process of integration, because you have to be able to get above something to really get the overview and the vision and the perspective. And you really have to get down deep into the darkness, what I refer to as your inner cave. You have to go deep to really understand not just yourself, but then others. And to go in to do the inner work, it's more than just observation. It's now about doing the process that brings that outer perspective and that inner deep dark work of discovery into some kind of holistic expression of the self. I love it. I might even have to use it in my own life.
Feel free to steal like an artist. We're very, very comfortable with that. So I'll share that. I'll do a little bit more of sort of, stylized thing or something, but I'll definitely want to share a whole bunch of these kind of models for self-exploration, integration, all these kind of things. So then here's one thing that I've been contemplating about. It's a question around, because I have this, there's like a bunch of archetype cards, okay, which I bought, and it's an interesting way to explore them. And there's like the light side and the shadow side, the sort of the opposite of each archetype. And so I've been wondering whether, let's say, if there is such thing as a process of absolute integration, which we're sort of always shooting for this completeness, absolute completeness. Is it then really about integrating every single archetype in a meaningful way? Or is it really about focusing on the ones that are resonant with you? What's your take on this?
I definitely think it's useful to create a collection that represents a collection of archetypes that represent you as an individual, as a person, as a soul. And to keep that number relatively small. Everyone is different and unique, and I respect that. But I tell people, 10 to 15 archetypes. And most people can tell you they have approximately 10 to 15 sides of their person. Your buddy friends might only know 2 or 3 sides of you. A romantic partner will know a completely different side of you than any other person on earth knows. And so forth. We have sides or selves. And the archetypes can represent these different dimensions of our personality and deeper than personality, dimensions of who we are as a being. And so I like to create this collection, and I encourage others to create a collection. So where you have the cards, it's easier to lay them out and find those that resonate with you and put together a little grouping of them. And then you can look back over them and say, is that me? And what part of my life is reflected by this behavior? How does this archetype show up in my life? Who triggers this shadow side in me? And so forth. And it takes a lot of time. It took me about 3 years to put together a small group of archetypes that I felt fully represented all the sides of me.
Okay. We're also like, so my background is coming from engineering world and computer science and programming and programmers. Like Apple did an announcement yesterday, and they said Apple Watch was able to do 600 billion computations per second, but the new Apple Watch can do 5 trillion computations per second. So and then it all does it in less time and less battery wastage. So like us engineers are always looking for a way to optimize things, like how can we get there faster and more in a more kind of structured way. So I wonder, how could we create a process in which that process that took you 3 years could potentially be done with someone who's willing to say, okay, I'm looking to completely understand myself in a trusted, reliable, working way, okay, result producing way. What would that process look like? Is that even possible? As that's me asking as an engineer / architect. You're on mute. You're on mute.
I definitely think it's possible to be able to find some streamlining process to get to the same place. I didn't know where I was going. When I first started this process, I just had these upsetting dreams that I was trying to solve. And so that 3-year process is partly due to the fact that I had no goal in sight. I had nothing I was moving toward. So I was in a state of discovery. And that state of discovery took me down many different avenues. And I think if you were able to approach it more directly with more intentionality, then that alone would bring you to the end result much faster. And the purpose of it is not, there's really no end game. We never truly understand ourselves, and then we'll be able to mark the finished box. I'm done. I totally understand who I am. There's nothing more for me to learn. Because we're evolving and changing and becoming, then our archetypes are also evolving, changing, and becoming. And so we're in this ever moving cyclical process of self-discovery. The person you were, for example, 10 years ago is not the same person you are today. And that's true of everyone. Your archetypes don't change in a way from, like, you don't lose an archetype and gain a new one. You are who you are at a fundamental, elemental state. But they evolve the way your personality has evolved. It might have been, more immature at earlier stages, and then it matures and changes in subtle and nuanced ways as you mature. And archetypes are the same. And so this process is ongoing. There's a discovery aspect that never ends. There's a joy. There's pleasure in it. It's exciting. And this integration process is ongoing. It's like the weather. We're never really going to be able to predict it, but we never want to stop learning about it. We never want to stop understanding how to relate to the climate. And so I like to think of archetypes in that way, almost an entity that we have to come in relationship with.
Wow, every one of your answers is causing me to have to contemplate a little bit to really synthesize this. So this is something I'm definitely going to be rewatching a number of times and taking notes and sketches out of it. So going off this idea of triangulation of self, right? Is there such a thing? And it's also very interesting because I have at the moment, 11-year-old son and 7-year-old daughter, and the 11-year-old son is going on 37, right? He knows everything, and it's interesting for me as a dad, and it seems to be like one of those father traits, let's say, like a quote unquote alpha male father traits. I'm going to make you a bit tough. And I noticed that I kind of like to push his buttons, take the mick out of him here and there. And I see he gets triggered. He gets, and all that stuff. And so, so then I wonder, okay, why am I doing this? And why is he getting triggered? Why am I doing this? And why is he getting triggered? And why is it so much fun? So there's three aspects there. One, why am I doing it? My archetype. Why is he getting triggered? His archetype. And the third aspect, why is this so much fun? When you kind of clash these two together, you get some sort of third outcome that seems to happen, which maybe there's two kind of negatives. In this case, perhaps make a some sort of seemingly positive thing. Or what's your take on this as an absolutely much more masterful person than I am, because you're a woman, and women brought us all into being, so and you brought six people, six souls into being, right? So you're an absolutely super strong person. Tell me, how do you see this from a female perspective and mom of six, and do you do this, and why does it happen?
I'm glad you brought up parenting, because that was an unintended advantage that studying archetypes gave me. When I began to recognize in my children these certain patterns, then I was able to respond in ways that actually got results. But I want to stop for a second and look at your interaction with your son and use this as an opportunity to illustrate two archetypes, the child and the father. Now, I heard this saying once about parents, and I thought it was great, and it perfectly described the role of mother and father with child. And it goes like this: mothers stroke, fathers poke. And I thought that that was just brilliant, because the role of the mother, archetypally speaking, is to nurture and soothe, to care for, to be a soft place for children to grow and for them to become. The role of the father, archetypally speaking here, is to provoke, it's to push, to guide, to inspire, and to lead the child forward. The child needs both of these elements in order for them to become fully realized into a mature adult being. And so what you were describing in that moment, possibly in the shadow, possibly not, only you would know that, is this expression of your desire to push your child into self-discovery, push him into his own realization of what his limits are and what causes him to react and what is his reaction when he gets a little provocation. This is actually like a training ground, the master that's training the student. And we do this subconsciously. But imagine being able to approach that interaction with your son with consciousness. What exactly am I provoking him to think of? What do I want him to be uncomfortable with? What do I want to make him aware of? And I think that that's a perfect example of how you can use archetypes right in a moment of interacting with a child, a spouse, a friend, and it immediately transforms, or it elevates perhaps, the whole interaction. And you're bringing a level of awareness and consciousness that ends up benefiting both parties. And so I think that that's a great story. And I think it shows very well how we operate unconsciously, naturally from these archetypal patterns, but how learning to understand them and even being curious yourself, what is a father? What is this father archetype? How have I seen it expressed in other cultural expressions? Movies, for example. Is there a film in which a father is portrayed that you find inspiring? And why? And doing that discovery work about yourself and that archetype.
Yeah, it's amazing because a colleague at work talked about how she got divorced because her husband just couldn't take marriage and family and settling down seriously, and I have no idea what their situation was and so on. So I just kind of leaped to suggestion and conclusion that he probably didn't have a very good relationship with his mom, and he never integrated that. He's missing that part of himself, and he's sleeping around with lots of different women because he's looking effectively for his mom without actually knowing that he sort of needs to reconcile that backwards somehow. And she turned around to me and, yeah, that's exactly it. And I was like, yeah, it's a very archetypal situation. Like so many men are effectively boys, like adult children who are just walking around pretending to be men, but actually having major gaps and holes in their psyche, and they're suffering really because of it, and not even aware of the fact that they don't know that they don't know. Sometimes quote that, like, it was Dick Cheney who was talking about unknown unknowns. So what do you what do you recommend to people? Tell us, okay, tell me a little bit about, like, what do you teach about? Because you said you're a teacher and a writer. So what do you teach about, and what does your kind of professional life look like?
Well, I use the term teacher in a very casual way. I think we're all teachers. I think everyone from the smallest human to the oldest person, and every interaction, whether it's with a stranger on a bus, whether it's with a dear family member, we're all teachers and we're all students. And so in that capacity, I use the term teacher because I believe that that's part of how we evolve as a species, is we learn from one another. And we sometimes project our feelings and our thoughts and our ideas and even our identities. We project those onto others. And with that projection, we're able to then see ourselves in newer and clearer ways, which is why judgment is such a powerful tool. When we look at how we judge someone, it's like looking into a mirror. That judgment is actually a projection of the part of ourself we can't see. And we project it onto someone else so that we can then see it, so that we're not so close to it. So sometimes these unconscious behaviors, like this individual you were speaking of, who was unable to stay in this relationship, there was this psychic hole, I think you called it. And we are wise beyond our own imaginings, that we then begin to do this negative behavior, not because we're stupid and we're broken, but because our subconscious mind is trying to show us this hole. It's trying to put a mirror up and say, do you see the hole? Do you see it? Do you see it? And so I think that there's something to be said right there about what we normally think of as bad behavior. It is actually our subconscious attempt to correct that behavior. And unfortunately, it takes some of us longer than others to discover that and make that correction. And as far as my professional life goes, I'm a full-time writer, and so that's what I consider my profession and my career. Archetypes is something I've just done on the side, somewhat reluctantly. I think it's been at the encouragement of my friends that I've even written and posted things online about it. We've spent a lot of time, my friends and I, together in discussions about this, and they love it and they want me to do more with it, talk about it more. And I don't have any background in psychology or human behavior. I haven't done anything that gives me any kind of social credentials. I think my curiosity, my love of learning, and my interest in how all of this works is probably the best background I can have in regards to all of this. So
actually, that's I sometimes joke with people. I call myself a shed psychologist, and in all my spare time, I'm studying and learning and experimenting with psychology. And sometimes I say I've got a guy in the shed that I haven't let out for like 17 years, and I ask him always different questions, and people think like, is he for real? Or, even that is an interesting psychological experiment. But yeah, so so there is a notion here in what you said in the last bunch of statements. So you said our subconscious is looking to complete us, is helping us, is guiding us to the archetype that we're missing to complete ourselves. So in that statement, and by the way, I've come across this idea of statement analysis. So now I learn how to listen to what people say and sometimes write it down and really then analyze which words did they use to describe this situation. This is a little segue, but they'd say, like in statement analysis, they'd say they can detect if someone's being abused at home based on how they speak. So for example, typical person would, if a person says something like, I woke up in the morning, I went to the bathroom, I brushed my teeth, then I put the clothes on and went out to work. And they would immediately flag up, say, this person's being abused at home. The reason being that they mentioned that they brush their teeth. And the reason why that's important is because the person who's being abused at home is constantly under threat from their person that they're living with. And when they go to the bathroom and they're brushing their teeth, they have like a few minutes alone where they feel safe. So for them, that sticks in the mind as a memorable thing, like an experiential moment in the day. So the statement analysis can actually read right in between the lines into what's happening in that person's psyche and what's really going on. So you had said, I'm doing this kind of statement analysis on your statements, and you're saying our subconscious is looking for completion in the conscious. So the question is, what does that completion look like? And how does that marry up with your statement that it's a never-ending journey? And I'll then pose a theory to you that I want to see how you, it was like, this is a shed psychologist to shed psychologist discussing things, right? So what is that completion? What does completion look like?
That's a really great question, and I love that idea of statement analysis. It's really fascinating and very true, by the way. So let me think for a moment. I think the best way I could describe this is like our human condition is a big puzzle, a giant 5,000 piece jigsaw puzzle. And completion is every time we find a piece of the puzzle and we're able to look at what at first appears to be this random, got a weird shape to it. It might have some different colors that we think doesn't belong in this puzzle anywhere. But as we keep this process up and we keep examining and we keep measuring that puzzle piece against other shapes and spaces, we finally discover where it fits. And when we do, we get a slightly larger perspective of who we are. And that just excites us, and we go on to do more discovery. I guess what I'm saying is the puzzle's never completely finished. It's an ongoing puzzle. More pieces are added as we become older, wiser, have different experiences, etc. And so the puzzle is ongoing. Therefore, the process of discovery and self-awareness and getting that perspective is also ongoing. But the more pieces of the puzzle you are able to successfully place, the clearer the image of yourself reflects back to you. And you're able to operate with others and yourself from a place of clarity, from a place of fullness. You can see who you are. You can also see what pieces are missing. You're able to recognize your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities, where you're struggling, what you still have left to uncover. And ironically, the more of the puzzle you put together, the more you realize there's left to do. And that's not a bad thing. This idea of never ending is kind of eternal life in a sense. We're ongoing. And I like that idea of infinity, maybe is a better word. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, so one of the aspects of integral theory, one of the big chunks of it is the model of spiral dynamics, which talks about evolution of human consciousness from instinctive self through to magical self, which is a tribal human. So instinctive is about I, then magical is about we, then it rises up into power self, which is I, and the rise of the ego. Then it rises to rule role self, which is about we as a larger community. This is nation states, etc. Then it rises up to super rational achiever, level 5, which is about I and winning while more or less following all the rules. Then it rises up again to sensitive self, which is about we. This is archetypal hippies and green people who are starting to care about planet much more. But then people get this radical shift in consciousness, and they rise from tier 1 to tier 2, which is now integral realm, where they start playing with all these levels of consciousness, from instinctive through magical, power, rule, role, super rational, and sensitive. And then from integral, which is a planetary level consciousness, they rise up into cosmocentric consciousness, which is moving towards holistic view of everything and integration of everything. And then even beyond that, there is level tier 3, which is about unified self, being one with everything, and basically equating to this clear, transparent light. And so here is what my theory proposes to you, that there is a notion of metaphysical self, and that construct, that architecture of your higher self, of your metaphysical framework of how things operate, the rules that generate the observable reality, are somewhat finite, and that we can get to a completion on a metaphysical level. And then what that metaphysical self generates in the observable reality, we talk about the idea that your body is a printout of your mind, like a 3D printout of your mind. Those are like infinite outputs. But that's why sometimes we say that there's nothing ever new in this world, meaning that, you are going to give birth to a human. You're not suddenly going to give birth to an alien, right? We kind of know that, right? And if that was ever to happen, it would be, like what has happened in this universe. And so it's like, it's nothing new, they're 50% you, 50% your partner, these are all kind of quite predictable rules. So that metaphysical self, the theory goes, is completable, but then what you end up experiencing is infinite and absolute infinity. What do you think of this?
I think you just described what I was saying. For me, that's how I heard it. That's how I understood it, that there is a part of us that we want to complete. There's a part of us, for example, in my life, having dealt with a lot of abuse, I did need to bring that trauma into conclusion. I did need to be able to, quote, heal that trauma. But taking it to that next level, the maybe cosmic level, the wound never healed. It remains, I have access to it like a portal. The wound actually takes me to these infinite spaces. And so while on the metaphysical plane, as you referred to it, the wound no longer hurts. I have no more pain around it in the typical sense. When I move into a different sphere of thinking about it, and when I recognize that it has actually shaped my consciousness, which I believe is infinite, then I recognize that the wound was a doorway, and it allowed me to enter into a space that would have been impossible without that experience. And so I thought that was a really interesting way to describe that there are certain levels where we do seek out completion. We do want to get all those puzzle pieces put into place. We want to feel like that we have arrived in a sense. And yet there's also this ongoing process, this ongoing becoming, this evolving that doesn't end. And I think it's important to recognize that we don't have all the answers, and that the mystery is part of the wisdom, that we're not meant to have all the answers. Otherwise, we stop searching. And it's the search that leads us to everything. And so we need to have that hunger and that curiosity so that we will keep searching.
I think on that note, I'm conscious of time, and this definitely has to be like a 3 or 4 part series. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, and I feel like I want to rewatch this and then derive a whole bunch of other questions. You know, there's all these kind of offshoot branches that we could have explored and could explore, and certainly this is something that I would love to. And it you know, one thing that's really become pretty obvious to me, that like some people are really, really thorough in how they approach things, and they do it in a complete way. We talked a lot about completion. They do it in a complete way, and really research it in depth, and look at things from all sorts of different perspectives to understand, understand, and overstand. And and often the time those people are not academics. They're not really kind of the qualified researchers. They're people on fringes, uh, uh, but who actually have much better clarity and much more reference, right, from real world, as to go like, oh, and like this archetype isn't something that, you know, I read about as a piece of narrative from a story, like people watching Lord of the Rings. It's like, wow, that's fascinating. Like, what the hell's that talking about, right? You're gonna like, you've seen all those in real life, right? So they're like, they're like, oh, I know this, like for real, and I also know it on the metaphysical level as to how it all fits together and so on. So it's super cool to speak to you and sense that, you know. I think that's why I got a tear in my eye straight into like 5th minute of this conversation. So tell, like, okay, we'll wrap up the conversation, but to wrap it up, just cast a few intentions into the universe. What are you looking for more of in your life? Tell the universe, and we'll share this like far and wide.
Well, I think for me, what I would love to see most for myself and for the world as a whole is for us to realize that our answers are within, not without. And I see the political strife. I see the fear in people. I see the cruelty. And I just want people to go in instead of out, and to point inward and to do the inner journey. And I want to continue on my own, and am continuing on my own inner journey. And I want friends with me along the way. I want to look out into the world and see that we're all doing it together. And I guess in a sense we are, each person on their own path, at their own point on that path. But that's something that is very deep inside of me that I want to be a part of, and I'm glad to be a part of.
All right. So on that note, you know, we've literally connected. I reached out to you reading your blog post. I said to my colleague and coach and brother from another mother, Anthony, you know, as I'm going to have to interview Susanna, because, you know, I just feel this writing so much. And it's the first time we ever chat, but I feel like I've known you for decades. So, you know, once again, I want to just show you massive, massive respect. You know, send you lots and lots of positive vibrations, and lots of you know, appreciation, and you know, all the best to you and your family. Hugs and kisses to all the children, you know. And let's do this another time, you know. It's part 2, more questions, more exploration, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you for reaching out. I typically don't do these sorts of things. I'm more hesitant about it because I think a lot of important topics tend to get a little whitewashed and people don't take them seriously. And I just don't want to be throwing a bunch of mud out there. There's so much information out in the world right now, and I don't want to just be another voice out there just talking about whatever. So, but for whatever reason, it just felt right to me too. So I appreciate what you're doing here, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this event, and I'll come back. You say the word.
Thank you so much. One of the things that we seem to have clocked onto is that certain realizations are forever, they're eternal realizations. And as such, it's worth spending time and really, as you said, exploring yourself to come to a firm conclusion about how some things work, and then documenting them in a way that's meaningful and structured and useful for others in a creative and evolving way. So these conversations are meant to be focused on those kind of things rather than discussing the events that are going on right now, and that in 3 months' time no one's going to remember, and because they were completely irrelevant, and they were just like the reflections of those unintegrated shadow selves, right? It's like, let's work on what's more important, which is to integrate that stuff and work towards that completion, so that then we can see what we can do from there on, from that complete self. And our mission, really integral mission, is redesigning humanity, and we've come to a very firm conclusion that that has to start with self. So there you go. Thank you so much, Susanna, and let's talk again in a month or two. We'll agree. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.